The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
Okay, just a few announcements before we get into lecture today. So the structure for today, hour lecture, 2 hours work in your groups. We have, unfortunately, Elle, the grad student who's working with the Heatwave, who would be using the Heatwave game, is sick today, so she won't be able to come in. But I'm working on rescheduling a time for her to come in. What I'd love to do is if we can get her a web link of the Heatwave game that she can then give you feedback on. That might be good for you guys, for y'all. For the rest of the class, we've got Pablo in today. He talked to the Snap team already. Is he going to talk to you again today, or are you guys all on the right page with him?
It'd be nice to show him the game.
Okay. Oh, you didn't show him the game then? Okay, cool, cool. So he's going to take a look at, what I'd like him to do is take a look at the forecast-based future game today, if you can, at 2 o'clock. I'm just show him a build, get some feedback from him. And then he'll take a look at the Snap game, and then if he's got time, the 2 cholera games. He can take a look at those. And again, if you want to give him web links to playable versions of the games, just send them to the video game bosses list, and I'll forward them on. Other announcements, we have, so this Friday, and I'm going to email this to the announcements list later today. This Friday, there is a free conference workshop thing going on at a hotel, I think, in Boston. But it's being run by Epic Games about Unreal. So they're going to do a bunch of different workshops from about 2 to 5 and end the day with a networking party. So if you're interested in using the Unreal Engine and all the different new things about that engine, they'll be running that. They're also going to be on campus Tuesday at 5 p.m., so Tuesday, November 18th. That can be found at the Game Lab website. And they'll be talking about Blueprint, a way to do scripting in Unreal that's kind of similar to some things I've seen for Unity, but it's baked into Unreal. And if you use previous versions of Unreal, I think it's related to Kismet, if you used that tool before. Otherwise, upcoming guests we have to class that are different from the syllabus. On Monday, we're going to have 2 writers in talking with Drew, doing a little panel and then a Q&A with y'all, talking about different ways of looking at writing for games. That I think are going to be very directly related to at least 2 of the games that I've seen. Because yours is a very dialogue-driven game, yeah? And then the Animal Crossing kind of game, I imagine it'd be really useful for you all. Probably useful for the other two as well, but those are the ones that I first came to my mind when I was scheduling that one. And then on the 19th, right, we have Blizzard coming in, right?
I think that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, so Wednesday 19th, Blizzard's going to come in. And it's teams from Heroes of the Storm.
I think so,
but yeah, we're not quite sure exactly who's gonna be there for that. But we talked to them and we requested either Heroes of the Storm or Hearthstone. So one of those groups will begin to talk about their production process, and you can ask them things about what it's like to work at Blizzard. That's everything I've got. Yeah, so I'm gonna bring it over to your wired. Cool, great.
So when I went over to GDC Next just last week, I met Richard. Actually, he's been to our lab before, and he gave this talk on game audio. And then I remembered, wait a minute, there's a talk on game audio that's coming up in class, and I was just going to fake it. And then I heard his talk and realized maybe he should be the one talking to you instead. So I invited him and Andy Forsberg, who's his partner at Hexany Audio. Let's see, you'll see the name of the company come up in the next slide. And they do professional sound design and audio design and music. That includes things like sound effects, as well as scoring, and also advising companies on things like the technology that they're using. And he's going to talk a little bit about how to do good audio on a budget, as well as just things to think about in your audio design of your own games. So I'm going to hand it over to you, and thank you very much for speaking today.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. Happy to be here. Just curious, so the class, I'm wondering, what level is it? Is it more introductory, advanced? What's the the focus?
Intermediate. So they're making video games, but it's a class that actually has prerequisites, so they needed to take other classes either in game design or in programming before they came in.
Okay, cool. Cool. So I'm just curious, like, show of hands, how many people like are planning to go out into the world after you graduate and become game designers, game developers? Anyone? Anyone? Okay, cool. Cool. Nice. That's cool.
Sweet.
No, very nice. Great. So yeah, we're gonna talk to you about music and sound in games, and then give a little bit of very practical advice about working with composers and working with sound designers, since that's the situation most of you will probably be in. So we'll give you a little overview of ourselves in a second, but if you want to go on to the next slide, we're gonna talk about 3 key areas. Yeah, we're just gonna tag team this, like we're just gonna So the 3 things we're gonna talk about are number 1, interactivity. So we're gonna talk to you about what makes game audio different than film audio and why you should care about it. And then in agreements, we're gonna talk about contracts, and what that looks like for you hiring a composer or a sound designer, which is really most often the case with an indie game. And then lastly, we'll talk about money and budgets, and how much hiring one of us or, audio guys takes. So, yeah, a little bit about us. I'm Richard Ludlow again, and I'm the audio director at our company. And Andy is the music director.
Yeah, and you both went to school in Boston, actually.
Yeah, just across the river over at Berkeley, and did their game audio thing. And now we started the company Hexany Audio. And basically, music, sound, and dialogue, as well as implementation services, are what we do with our clients. So,
and we're based in Los Angeles, obviously.
Yeah, based in LA, and we have experience working on larger AAA console games, lots of mobile indie things. So really wide range, and we do film and commercial media as well. But our focus really is on games and interactivity and the technology that drives that. So, yeah, without further ado, if you want to jump ahead to the basics. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, music and games is all about the dynamic experience and player input in the game and how the music and sound effects adapt around that. Obviously, it's much different than linear media such as film, TV, etc. When you watch a film, that same explosion is going to happen in the same point every time. So obviously, with games, we have to change that because games are different, and we have to make it adaptive to what's going on. So there's 4 major parts to audio in a game, usually. There's the music, there's the sound, and the dialogue. But the major part of this, again, is the implementation into the game. If we write amazing music or sound effects, or we have the coolest voiceover artist in the world, and we get them to do that stuff for our game, if we implement it incorrectly, or the developer doesn't do such a great job because there wasn't a dialogue between us, then all the stuff on the left side, those 3 things, almost don't even matter. So it's all about how it gets put in the game, as well as how it's crafted for. So.
And we're going to talk about that in the interactivity section if you're like, what is this implementation witchcraft we speak of?
Exactly.
Anyway.
Next slide.
Yeah, so the importance of audio, really talking about why you guys should care about audio, because, so often, you think, okay, I've got this mobile game, I'm going to shut off the audio, who cares about it? But, the depth that it adds is really important. And, we just like to touch on 3 key areas of why music and sound is so important in games, if you want.
Yeah, the first being obviously the emotional factor, and you can't get around that. Basically, with everything else, basically audio goes straight to the center of your brain that controls that stuff. It just skips everything else and stimulates that. So obviously, if when we were kids, we'd turn the music off of a game or turn the music off of a film, and we'd realize that we weren't having those emotional responses that we did when it was on. So obviously emotion is a huge part of what we do.
Yeah, and that's like a chemical response, like Andy said, it's like actually eliciting, just to emphasize again, like a chemical response. Visuals do not trigger these emotional processing centers.
Yeah.
It's like sound and music, that's stimulating parts of your brain that are like different. Yeah. And actually creating the emotion. It's pretty amazing. At least we like to think so.
Yeah.
Anyway, cool. So the next one is like function, and this isn't a great term, but audio, it supports the ability for the player to really absorb a lot of the game information. So when I say function, it has the function of giving you information and also the function of telling you, what's going on with regards to your actions. So, for example, you're walking down a hallway and you've got there's a guy up ahead that you hear, maybe walking, and okay, there's a guard up ahead, and then maybe your oxygen tank is running low and you've got a little beep, and your health is maybe at 50%. Maybe there's an alarm going off in a building. You hear a guy in the next room. You hear all these different things, and all of that is information that's being processed and sent to you, and you're able to absorb it all instantly without needing to think and see like text on the screen that says, oh, okay, I'm like at 50% oxygen. There's 3 enemies nearby. It's getting dark out because I hear the crickets. This is just stuff that your brain like subconsciously absorbs. So it's functional in that it provides that information for players in an entirely new dimension that is subconscious to them. So you can convey lots of subconscious information.
Exactly.
And then also it's that feel-good factor for games. So you punch a guy and hold up on that maybe. But you punch a guy and it feels like it feels good in the game, and that is because of that trigger, the sound meshing with the psychological peak. And anyway, so the sounds we were talking about that are memorable. I know you just played, what was that, like the Zelda sound or something?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't quite hear.
Obviously, yeah, it obviously has to be memorable game audio as well. And you played the Zelda one. You think of the countdown for Mario Kart where it makes you want to hit A really fast and beat everyone, obviously. But there's countless examples.
We might have it. Let's see. You can just play them all. Just play them all. Let's see. I'm not sure if you've played them, but I'll just talk about them. Anyway, there you go. So, I mean, these are really iconic sounds, and I think the Mario coin sound is next. Let's see. Maybe. Yeah, so, that sound defined an entire generation of games. And the Zelda sound, like when you hear that, that's like extremely rewarding for the player. It's extremely memorable. Sound is like burned into a player's conscience, in a way that that doesn't necessarily happen with visuals. Like you hear that, and you hear the achievement sound that we played, and it's like, oh, I've unlocked that. There's like this stimulating reward response. And so good sound and bad sound is going to stick with your players, and it can really help set that game apart so that later on the players are remembering your game in a very unique way.
Yeah.
Anyway,
next slide.
We'll move on to the real stuff now. So interactivity, that was kind of the preface. So the first section that we talk about is, that implementation and how that works in games. And interactivity is a huge part of that. So if you want to jump ahead to the next slide. Yeah.
So on the music side of things, obviously we want music that changes dynamically based on what the player is doing, whether he's walking into a field and staying there for 5 hours because he left it on to go make a sandwich, or because he's walking in to buy something from a shopkeeper. So how do we do that? There's several different things we can do, whether a player's going into battle, etc. We can use one system called layering, which Richard's going to talk about in another slide. We're going to talk about crossfading, and then you're going to give you an example of branching as well. And then there's also generative, and these are just a few. There's so many options that we can use to implement music in a cool, interactive way. So
yeah. So let's jump over to one of the examples and go ahead and throw that up. Don't hit the play button quite yet. So you can hit the next slide and it'll pop up the graph. Great. So what you're seeing here is the idea of a layered score. So in this one, this is a piece of music I wrote for a game where there's 3 different intensity layers, and you're going to hear a first one that's very low intensity, and then you're going to hear these other layers come in on top as maybe the player starts to go into an area with enemies, and then they go into an area where they're in battle, and you'll hear the music kind of stack in a very dynamic way. Anyway, go ahead and hit play. Let's see. So that low intensity. Player's done something. Some game. Still do that next layer. The second, here's come in on top. just the first two, and then just the first one. So you can see this was like, you could hear the layers fading out in and between one another, but it was a very dynamic experience. So this is where we'd like take the music and we'd specifically craft it and write it so that these things could stack and be triggered dynamically based on whatever the player's doing. So let's jump ahead to the next slide. So this is one more example, and this is the last one we'll show you for music, that deals with the way that music can move dynamically between states again. So yeah, so we've got the low, medium, high, but this time we've broken it out into smaller little chunks. So the player will do something, and the music will actually wait until a musical point, like the next bar or beat, and then it will begin a transitional segment into the next level intensities. And this is going to be a much more dynamic and fluid experience than the layering. So go ahead and hit play. Low intensity again. So player's going to do something, and it's going to come in with the transition. Transition. Now we're going to go into medium and medium. Player's going to do something, music's going to wait until the transition. Transition. Now we're going into high. And back to low. Cool, so you saw the music move through 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 different pieces there. Oh, but it sounded like the experience was being scored. So again, the idea here is, we're trying to, again with a film, you watch it, it goes by, you know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen with the game. So we write music that can change and adapt like that in a very film-like way to score the player experience. So, why do we do this?
So obviously it creates a more immersive and dynamic player experience. Anytime we're taking you guys out of that escapist experience, like we're not doing our job, it extends track longevity, which we'll explain later with budgets why that's nice as well. But you get better replay value out of it, and it's the greatest value from each individual minute of music.
Yeah.
So
instead of having to write, hire someone to write 3 different pieces of music, if you're on a budget, you can say, we'll do 1 piece of music and we'll make it layered, and it'll be 1 better piece of music.
Exactly, because like something like if a movie is 90 minutes long and they want 60 minutes of music, you write 60 minutes of music. One small mobile game could have 15 minutes of music, or it could have 1 minute of music, or 3 minutes of music. So it all depends.
Yeah, and that that goes into, we'll talk about with budgets how that affects that. But so yeah, jumping on to the next slide, how do we do these interactive systems? We build them with what we call audio middleware. And 2 of the commercial ones are Fmod that you see here, and if you want to jump ahead to the next one, Wise. And these are just screenshots. And essentially, these allow us to interface with programmers and set up these musical triggers and these points of musical change based on different parameters like number of enemies around or game state or health, and let us set up these musical transitions and things like that. So yeah, we can jump on to the next section. Agreements, yeah. So you've learned all about interactivity, and you're like, yes, this is awesome. I'm going to hire a game composer so that they can do this stuff. And then with music though, it's a very it's obviously a creative piece of content. So the agreements look a little different sometimes than other agreements, and so we're going to show you 3 different kinds.
Yeah. So the purposes of these contracts are obviously to see who owns it, obviously, first and foremost, what we're going to be delivering to you, what the delivery milestones are in a game, just as there's development milestones, how much you guys are paying, which is super important for you and us. And you know, what's your rights as a developer? Where can you use it? Can you go around and license it to use it in all the things involved with your project, or no? And what are our usage rights? Can we use it in our portfolio, on our Facebook page? Can we do that sort of thing? So so we're just going to go through a few of the contract types here. So
yeah, and it's really important to spell out all those things. So yeah, let's look at the first one. Work for hire. You know, this is the most common type of agreement that you run into with composers, and it's essentially where I'm the composer, I've written music, and I am selling you my music or sound. You're buying it from me, and you're taking all the rights for it as a developer. You become the owners of the music and sound. And, you know, this is the most, and so you've got the rights associated with it. And because you have the rights, the developer then can usually use the audio however they want in the project because you own it. You've also got the exclusive right to use the audio, meaning you're the only ones that can use it. I can't go around and turn around and sell it to Bob or Joe over there. You've bought it, it's yours. And then lastly, you know, this is the disadvantage for developers is that this is a more expensive agreement because you are buying out all of our rights. And I'm going to show in detail in a few slides some important clauses to be aware of in these contracts. But yeah, so let's talk about, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, we've got work for hire where I'm me, the composer, selling the developer my rights. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got licenses.
great. So we have two sorts of licenses. The first we'll talk about is the non-exclusive. So this means that we are retaining the rights to the music, sound effects, anything we do for your project. We could go around and turn it to another game, etc. However, don't be afraid of these. We're writing the same custom music for your game, which is super important to remember. You're getting the same exact product. It's obviously a lot cheaper, and it's a great way to save yourself some money when working with people like us. And again, you can still have unrestricted use of the audio in your project and things involved with that usually. But, you know, again, we could turn around and use this for whatever we would like to use it for. So yeah, those are the main.
Yeah, and we use this negotiating with developers all the time. You know, so if they don't want to buy out all of our rights and pay that full price, we'll say, okay, well, we'll retain the right to go sell it to Bob and Joe and still give you the same music.
Yeah. So.
But yeah.
And then we have obviously the exclusive license, which is you're going to retain all of the rights, but it's usually for a certain amount of time, and then those rights transfer back to us. And sometimes it's industry specific, so we might be able to use that audio in a trailer or a film or something. However, pertaining to the game or anything in the game world, we're not going to turn around and license that to someone else. Usually this lasts about 1 to 5 years. We like to call this the happy medium, you know, between the work for hire and the non-exclusive license. And it really is a healthy balance of price and control because it's right in the middle as far as price is concerned. Yeah. And everyone's kind of happy. You guys could use it for what you need, but then we also get those rights back eventually. So
yeah. So work for hire. I make the music. I'm the composer. I sell it to you. You get all the rights. Non-exclusive. I'm the composer. I make the music. I retain all the rights, and I can sell it to other people. Exclusive. I'm the composer. I make the music. I retain the rights, but I give you the exclusive right to it. So I can't sell it to anyone else. And then it usually reverts back to us after a brief time. Yeah. Or yeah. As discussed. So most common though is the work for hire, and you're like seeing that contract and you're like, oh my god, this is awful, I don't want to see this. But anyway, so yeah, let's jump through that really quick. Just a few key points that really you know, go to developers helping protect themselves. And I gotta hit play over here on my keynote so that I can see all the different slide changes. 1 second. Okay, cool. So the first thing, you know, services. It's like, you know, what are you paying for? Music, sound, dialogue, what are you buying? This will be really quick. Jumping on to the next one. So payment for services, what are you getting paid? You want to spell out exactly how much you're going to charge and how much you're going to pay for the music and sound. Next contract, and this is our next point, and this is the independent contractor point. That's important for you as a developer because this essentially says that the composer or sound designer you're hiring is not on salary and does not need benefits. They have to, you know, take care of their own taxes. It just protects the developers, so they're a little make everything clear there. Next, warranties. These are things, again, that protect you as the developer. So this says, okay, the music we're writing, it's original. We're not stealing John Williams music, as I always say.
Score again.
Yes, right. Seriously. But then if we do steal it, and we're not going to steal it, and there's some other warranties as well, but we'll jump on to the indemnification. So then it usually says, if we do steal John Williams music, you guys are protected. And there's different levels of indemnification, but the indemnification just says it falls on us if we screw things up. Next, there's usually a little confidential information clause, little NDA clause about not, disclosing things. And then some specific legal language about the ownership and assignment of rights, specific to work for hire, legal mumbo jumbo. We'll skip the subcontracting. And then there's some rights that are specific to us as the content creators. So if you remember, we talked about composer-specific rights, things like the ability for us to post our work on our website is something that we like in our contracts so that we can advertise, the music to other people to get them to hire us. Similarly, we often spell out how we're going to be credited, and the credit is a great way, as well to negotiate with your composer. If you're on a budget, maybe you say, okay, I'll put your name at the opening cinematic instead of, just in the back, because to help compensate for our lack of budget, we'll get you a little more exposure, things like that. So you spell out how you want to be credited. That's really it for the contract. I don't want to go too detailed there, but, some key points to be thinking about if you guys ever hire a composer or sound designer.
Yep.
Let's talk about money. This is the question most people have.
What?
And whenever I meet a developer, like without fail, within like 10 minutes of the conversation, they're like, what do you charge?
What's like general? What you charge for an indie game?
It's funny. I gave this talk at GDC Next, and you'll see by the end of it why I'm like, that's not a question I can just answer. And then I got like 3 emails from people who attended the talk after and who were like, can you just give me a range for like an indie budget? Anyway, but you'll see why that's funny in a minute. Because my response is always to them, when they ask, how much do you charge? My response is always, what's your budget? And the reason being, because there are so many factors.
What the deadline is.
Musical style, whether or not, we're talking about a solo piano piece versus epic orchestral piece.
Are we going to get live players to play those orchestral pieces, or a piano player to play that?
You can throw up the bullet points if you want, just FYI. We're just going through them. Anyway, and what's the release platform? Is this a AAA console, or is it a Facebook game for the American Cancer Society?
Again, are we going to use a work for hire or one of the license deals?
Right, like we just talked about, buying out the rights or us keeping the rights, really big effect on the price there. Yeah. How much are you buying? We're like Costco. Buy more and save.
Yeah. But if you're going to buy 500 sound effects, it's obviously going to be different than if you need 5 sound effects or 50 sound effects.
Yeah, and we give bulk discounts all the time.
Exactly, and that goes into obviously the depth of the audio experience as well, which is how crazy we're going to get with interactivity if we're going to be using middleware.
Like Andy said with the mobile game, you could put 1 minute, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, all in the same game. It's going to be a better game if you've got, maybe you don't need 20, but if you've got more than one looping track, it's going to be a better game, but the game can still exist with a single piece of music. So saying how much do you charge is a very, very difficult question to answer without knowing more about your game. Yeah.
One of our clients that we work with, on their page where you go to contact them, it says, when do you need your project done by? And one of the options is yesterday.
And deadlines are a huge part of that. Like sometimes we get calls where it's like, we need this in 2 days or in a day, and we'll do it, but it's going to cost more than if you need it in a year. Yeah. So contacting guys early is important.
Totally.
Anyway, let's jump on to payment models.
And you can hit all these bullet points again.
Yeah. I mean, just basically talking about how composers and sound designers charge. Typically with music, it's a per minute music, so not per minute that we're working, but
yeah. And then sound effects, unfortunately, right. And then sound effects are usually per asset, so
Yeah. Or sometimes a flat fee. That's also common too. You might quote a project and say, okay, I'll do your whole project regardless of how many sound effects for $20,000. I don't know what.
Sometimes hourly rate. We usually don't do this. Yeah. This is a really hard one to gauge. So usually
it's a valid thing. People do it. We don't. But Yeah.
And
Just some like weird thing happening below us.
Sorry. And then usually we really like to try to get back end profit sharing. You know, if
if the budget isn't there.
Yeah, that's a big thing with audio to think about. At the end of the day, is it really gonna cost that much to give 0.5% of back end when you can't give anything up front? Because we always have passion projects. You know, we make money on some of our projects, but we really like to believe in games that are really cool, and sometimes the best way to do that is just to share the game.
The indie scene, you know, like they often can't afford because they don't have that upfront money, and so we'll talk about a back-end profit sharing percentage. And you know, if you talk to people who have been doing this like 30 years, that didn't exist like 10, 20, 30 years ago. Like audio guys did not get back-end profit sharing usually because they were just paid up front. But that's kind of gone away, you know, and I guess that kind of is probably true of a lot of things, of all industries. But you know, that you know, so thinking about that is a very, you know, valid thing, and you know, it's usually accompanied by some upfront fee. It's usually a reduced amount, but you know, the back end thing is definitely valid. We want, you know, new developers to be, you know, less afraid of that and more open to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then any combination of the above too. Cool. Anyway, so how does this kind of break down? And you can throw all these up here, you know. Just showing you music, sound, and dialogue. You know, there's a lot of components here. So when we're talking about what we're charging, we charge different prices for themes in the music. So we might write a musical theme that has, you know, its setting, and we charge one price for that. But then we might put an arrangement of that in an underwater level, a desert level, a jungle level, the same theme, but different arrangements for different levels. And we charge less for those arrangements. Those little transitional segments you heard in that demo I played, those are transitions. We charge less for those, and an even different price for things like stingers, like a coin pickup or an end game, like sound like that when you die. With sound effects, we break things out into primary sound effects, like if you think about a creature having an attack sound, and then it's like die sound, idle sound. Those are all kind of primary sounds. Iterations might be like attack 01, attack 02, attack 03, die 01, die 02. And we charge less for iterations. UI and ambiences, different prices there. And then dialogue, there's just a whole slew of components like casting, different, you know, usually you hire someone to cast all the actors.
Getting Kevin Spacey for the next Call of Duty game, or we're
Kevin Spacey for the next
doing
mobile.
it ourselves.
Who doesn't want to use Kevin Spacey? Yeah. But you're right. And then, you know, so they charge, you know, a few hundred, a few thousand an hour, depending on the actor. Usually there's someone directing them while they're being recorded, someone recording them, editing them, processing. There's a lot, you know, just throwing this up here so you know all the different components of music sound that are out there. So again, asking what do you charge? What does your game need is, you know, very, we need to know what your game needs before we can say.
Cool, next slide.
Anyway, yeah. So we're getting close to the end here, and we can do some questions. But just talking about like a theoretical project. Say you've got a low budget, $160,000 Kickstarter project, you know, like, and remember, so talking about music sound, we're typically looking at like 5 to 15% of the budget being allocated to audio. 5 to 15, usually hovering around 10, 15, 20, 25. Very good.
100.
Very good. No, but seriously. And so a common problem with this, though, is that your game, to be awesome, needs like this much music. But your budget is only going to allow for this much music. So let's say we've got a hypothetical game here where a project might need 18 minutes of music and 300 sound effects. So say we were going to charge, you know, like $750 a minute for themes and $500 a minute for arrangements, which are, you know, kind of indie prices. You know, we charge up to like we do different scale because of all the different factors involved, but, you know, up to like $1,000 a minute is pretty typical. You know, the big guys on AAAs will be charging, you know, $2,500 a minute, but, you know, up to $1,000 a minute of music is pretty typical, between 500 and 1,000. And then maybe, you know, sound effects, maybe a combination of all those kind of total 12,500. Let's say this game, to be awesome again, needs $23,500 for the audio. And you're like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. And let's say the developer has only allocated 11,000 to audio.
Right, so some things we can do to reduce the cost are we can reduce the original music themes and increase the arrangements. So we can just do a lot of iterations things, which is actually a very feasible option because as composers we're trained to do that. We can reduce the number of sound effects iterations, just have more of those primaries.
Only attack 01 instead of 02, 03, 04.
Exactly. We can do back-end profit sharing, as we mentioned before, so maybe add 3% on that. And then we could use a license agreement instead of, say, you're using work for hire. So yeah.
Just some common things, to think about in that negotiating process about how can we work with the audio guy to reduce the cost to something we're both comfortable with. Yeah, so let's just wrap up really quick. What did we talk about? Interactivity. It's music, it's sound, it's responding dynamically to player input. The player does something, the music, the sound, it changes, it reacts. It's going to create a deeper player experience. It's going to reduce the cost if you do it right. And we're doing this with Fmod, Wise, Fabric, different audio middleware.
And then for budgets, we're trying to look at 5 to 15% of the total budget of your game allocated to audio. Remember to consider back-end payments. We really think that's going to be part of the future of how audio works within, especially the indie market. And just be willing to negotiate and figure things out. Your costs fluctuate, our costs fluctuate, so it just needs to be a negotiation, and we can usually figure something out, and any audio person can.
Yeah. Oh, and then we jumped over agreements. But,
sorry.
No, it's
writing
cool.
down.
It's all good. No, and agreements, again, we're talking about work for hire. I'm the composer, I'm writing the music, you as the developer are buying it. Licenses, I'm the composer, I write music, I retain the rights, and then I give you some type of license to use the music. But that kind of wraps up, I think, the core points we were going to talk about. I don't know if you guys have specific questions, we're happy to answer them. Or if Philip, you have any additional, points you want to touch on. Thanks.
I think for questions, if anyone has any questions, I'll repeat it so that since I'm a little bit closer to the mic, although maybe the mic might pick you up if you're in the back of the room. We'll give it a shot.
It doesn't need to be a question about what we talked about too, any audio related things.
Favorite color?
Yeah, as loud as you can. Did you manage to catch that?
I think so. So was the gist of it basically being folks using music and sound and then getting takedown notices? Is that what you said?
Yeah, takedown notices on services like YouTube or Twitch.
Yeah, absolutely. So the whole takedown notice thing has really come about because, people are just using the music or just using the sound without asking for permission for it. Now, in an actual gameplay video, if you're streaming Twitch, that is really a very developer-specific question, and that's not something that we, as the composers and sound designers, really even have control over.
Yeah.
If it's for a game and if it's in a game, if we're working on a Nintendo game and it goes out to them, then that is owned by Nintendo, and if it's not owned by Nintendo, they've got the license for it. So it's all on them with regards to that. So some developers are totally cool letting it slide, some developers are not. But that's really, it's a shifting, it's all being figured out.
And usually
right now.
that happens, obviously, in the bigger game world. You're not looking at, that might happen, like the biggest game that would probably happen within the indie world would be something like Journey or something like that.
And, most often, at least now, developers are, pretty cool with it. But I know they're, that it's all being figured out right now. That's a very shifting landscape.
And it has to do with royalties and music. And
that's another thing. There's
because there's easy, collections have been set up for film and TV for eons now, and there's a system in place for that, but there's really no landscape for games.
It's a little different with YouTube and then Twitch as well. We get paid 0.0001 cents every time someone watches something on YouTube. So
it's whole thing.
In 5 years, hopefully that will all be figured out, but sorry I don't have a better answer. It's not our fault. It's the developer.
Just a follow-up question on that. It seems like in order for all these services to actually detect that they're using the music, they need to cross-check it against some sort of audio database. So is that something that you as composers usually end up submitting, or is that something that the game companies usually end up doing? Or does it really depend on the license agreement that you have with the company?
It's usually the game. It's usually the developer.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a couple different ways. We have friends who work for PlayStation, and they were just talking about how they posted things on their PlayStation North America account, and they got taken down by PlayStation like Japan or something. So their own companies aren't even really able to quite mesh this together yet. But there's the databases are sometimes internal to publishers. But there are also sometimes, there's scanning services that these royalty agencies like BMI and ASCAP actually have, and they've got these automatic scanning that are set up. And that sometimes comes about because we submit our music to these royalty agencies like ASCAP and BMI in order to be able to get paid, but then they use them to find out how many times things are getting played. They don't use them to figure out like what should be taken down. So I think
exactly. Yeah, I think like especially like on the indie level, like if the only way we would be able to detect something is if we went and watched a YouTube video, our music was in it, and we're like, oh crap, that's my music.
We don't have like these engines going. Those are like the publishers have like teams of people doing takedowns on their content. So yeah, and I don't know all the details behind that, but that's right. But
sorry?
The ASCAP stands for
American Society of Composers and Publishers? I want to say publishers.
I think I'm published.
Yeah.
We're I don't know, we just get the checks from them.
BMI is Broadcast Music Incorporated.
Right, yeah. So you can take a look at it.
They're called PROs.
Composers, authors, and publishers. Yes.
Other questions?
The art talk last class, they talked about an artist test to see if the particular artist is right for the game. Is there any equivalent for music?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do those all the time, and that's a totally legitimate thing, if you aren't sure. Asking them to do like a 1-minute demo or like a 30-second demo. 1 minute, it can be like, but I'd say like a 30-second demo is totally legitimate. And usually the best way to do that, guys, just so you know, take some gameplay, be it from your game, a different game, concept art for your game. Take some visuals as a video, send it to them, or just concept art, send it to them, and let them work with that.
Because then we could even do an interactive demo for it at that point. The big thing again is there's a difference between being able to write good music and having a core concept for a game from the beginning and thinking about interactivity when you're composing and doing sound effects because it's a whole different animal.
Yeah. But the tests, the demos are totally legitimate. We do them all the time. But sending some visuals along is like very important to making sure you get what you want, and then we're able to kind of see what the game is going to look like and then make that decision. Otherwise, we might write something that that you might not have the vision for because we haven't seen the art, and maybe we could easily do what you wanted, but we just misinterpreted it and went a different direction. So, but yeah, test legitimate, absolutely.
Questions? Yeah.
How much are they paid for the music test?
Will you be paid for audio test or?
What did the art guys say? I'm curious.
What?
I mean, we have not found that to be extremely common with what we do. We'd like it to be more common.
It used to be a thing.
Yeah, it used to be
for
a
like
huge
film
thing.
or for commercials. It was a big thing. You get paid for doing a demo.
I think it's definitely more common in the game world. In the film and TV world, it's so saturated with composers and sound designers right now that they don't need to because so many people want the work. It is a respectful thing to do, I think. If it's a longer demo. If it's a shorter demo, then it's like we're happy to get the gig.
I mean, we're gonna keep the rights to that anyway. So you could say like a couple $100 maybe. But I mean, like it's not a required thing. If we want the gig, we're happy to do a 30-second demo to try and get it often. It's nice to throw a couple $100, but it's like at that point it's a couple $100. It's not like
Yeah.
it's like it's pennies in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
If the project is larger, so yeah. Anyway, hopefully that answers it.
Yes.
Do you find that part of your job is convincing people that audio is important?
Oh yeah.
yes. It's
Yeah.
that's a
I
big
mean-
part of it, you know.
Yeah.
We use the three things: emotion, function. No.
Yeah, I think the biggest argument in that is probably in the mobile scene. You know, where it's like someone sits on like in class, like someone was probably playing a mobile game during our talk today, and just kidding. You know, it's like a big thing. It's like, well, do they just mute that? And then it's like, yeah, you could say that, but like some people do listen to it. And when they do listen to it, they listen on headphones. And we were at a talk at a conference this year called Game SoundCon. With a composer named Guy Whitmore, who did the music for Peggle and Peggle 2, and he was talking about there's not a more intimate experience for audio than in headphones, you know, or in that arena. But I think, you know, in general, I mean, it is undeniably important.
You can put out a game, it can do well with, you know, a mobile game can do okay with, you know, bad audio. We're not gonna lie, that's a thing, like Flappy Bird. But I mean, believe me, I love Flappy Bird. Like,
Yeah.
I have like triple-digit score on Flappy Bird. So,
But,
but you know, if you want to set your game apart, you know, like people look at that polished experience. They look at, you know, if we're talking about indie games, they look at something like Journey, or mobile games, you know, something like Peggle 2. They look at that and they're like, wow, this entire experience is super polished. It's super. It's
right.
a great game.
And it's broken down into 3 parts, really, right? It's the functional, it's the mechanic of the game, it's the visual, and it's the audio, and those are all a third of the game. And if you take out one of those, it's like
You can still have a game if you don't have great art. That's fine. There's a lot of great games that don't have great art. If you don't have a great mechanics, okay, maybe it's pretty and sounds nice, like that'll still sell.
if that was a pie and you had people over for a party, would you hand them only 2/3 of the pie? They'd be like, this
Crazy.
dude is selfish.
So he says that because I eat like a pie. I have a thing where I eat a pie a week.
That's
Anyway,
a whole nother.
But no, seriously. So your game can function without one of these things being great, but like it's not going to be as great an experience. So, higher composers.
No, then I want to thank you again very much for speaking to our students, and everyone
for having us.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know. You feel free to put up our email addresses. Mine is R Ludlow, and his is A Forsberg. If you wanna. Okay.
At Hexany. Oh yeah, perfect. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
And yeah, feel free to shoot us an email. You know, I mean, if you have any questions, we're happy to. You know, we're happy to support audio with the new generation of developers. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
And there's a lot of great people over at Berkeley too, you know, like if you're looking for composers and sound designers to collaborate with, other students, there's a lot of great people over there. There's the Video Game Music Club.
Don't be afraid to cross the bridge.
Yes. The Video Game Music Club, they do a lot of, there's always like, if you shoot them an email, you'll get like 10 responses from people who are like, yes, let me like help you work on this game. Like, you're not getting paid, I'm not getting paid. They might be like okay with that.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys have the facilities for what you do, and Berkeley has the facilities for what they do. So.
Anyway, but then you can call us when you got paid gigs, you know.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, well, thanks so much. Really appreciate you guys caring about audio. Really, honestly, we really appreciate people caring about music and sound a little bit. So thanks so much.
Good luck with the rest of your semester.
Absolutely. Thanks. See you guys around.
Cheers, guys.
Adios.
So on that note, if you are taking CMS 617 next semester, the Advanced Game Studio, CMS 610, the Media Arts Industries blah class, both of those are making a good polished experience for the end of the semester, with the idea of either showing it to publishers or submitting it to a festival. So audio is really, really important in those two classes. And going to Berkeley for that kind of support is highly recommended. Also recommend in this class if you've got the time as well. And let us know if you'd like more information about connecting with Berkeley folks.
Yeah, we actually know the instructors and even some alums, but the alums know the people who are still in college.
Yep.
And
Just email Video Game Bosses if you'd like that contact info. Otherwise, you got 5 minutes to take a break, meet back up with your teams, and Pablo will be in at 2 o'clock to play your games.